Hey everyone, welcome to the latest and greatest episodes of the Dads in the Class podcast. This is season two. I am Dion Chavis, family engagement educator, positive parenting promoter, all things when it comes to connecting with young folks and helping families connect with children. I am he. Glad to be back in this space. Of course, I haven't been in this space for the Dads in the Class podcast for a little bit, but got a really good guest on this episode, our first episode of season two. I wanted to bring someone on who could talk to us and talk about family engagement and fatherhood engagement, and someone who is actually out there doing the work. And he is someone that I've known for several years, and we've met several different times, but we've never met in person. Even and we were even in the same space about a month or so ago in Atlanta at a family engagement conference, and our paths did not cross, but he is here, and we're going to talk to him. Ari Gerzon-Kessler. Did I get it right, Ari?
You did. Yeah, thanks, Dion. Great to be
All
here
right,
with you.
cool. Cool. So Ari he's a trainer, he's a speaker, he's a coach, and he works with school districts and he helps them to get connected and to forge stronger bonds and stronger partnerships. He's also a published author. His latest book on the same team, bringing educators and underrepresented families together, has won the gold medal for best education book of 2024. And he's just out here doing the work. So Ari, welcome to the show. Glad that we could have you here. And thank you before we get started. Just thank you for the work that you're doing for schools and for families in our community. I want you to share a bit with our viewers and with our listeners about your background and what kind of inspired you to start focusing on family engagement.
Yeah, thanks for having me again. I think what comes to mind first, Dion, is that when I was an undergrad, my older brother, was doing Teach for America in Mississippi, and we really those visits inspired me to want to be in the classroom. And all four of my grandparents were immigrants, and I really saw some of the hurdles, the challenges for them to be connected to the school system from the stories my mom and dad shared. And so I saw early on in the classroom the difference it made when I made greater outreach to families. I think, my third year in the classroom, I called every child's family in the first weeks of school. And I just saw what it did, my proactive effort, what it did to shift relationships. Um, so that was kind of a starting point. And then when I became a school leader and spent a decade doing that, I fortunately read a book that talked about the power of positive phone calls. And that became one
Mm,
of my go to strategies at every school I served as an assistant principal or principal. And so I think, on the one hand, I saw the power of high impact practices, and it really inspired me to see, wow, this family that in the past had been on the margins of the school, they now feel connected and trusted. And just because I carved out 5 minutes to share some surprising good news about their kid. Um, and, I'd say from those principal years, when I took on the role of leading a family partnerships department in our local district that's got 56 schools, I also had a ton of regrets. Like, I looked back and thought, man, I, I planned events for families with no families sitting around the table. And my guess is
mm,
that's probably true for about 90% or more of our schools today, that they're planning their
mhm,
conferences, their back to school nights. They're probably not bringing in the voices of families. So I was both fueled by regrets, a couple practices I was really proud of, and then just, I'm a big learner. And so my early years in this role, I'm now 7 years in, was how can I get my hands on as much of the research as possible, but then experiment with schools and see from successes and challenges, what makes a difference, especially in this time where public school educators, we're also overwhelmed and overstretched. How can we be really intentional and efficient so that we're engaged in the practices that deepen partnerships and don't further overextend us?
mhm, mhm. With everything that's going on, and I know a lot of our educators have so much that they deal with, right, in the schools today. with all of the just the things, right? Underpaid, overworked, not being able to teach certain things. There was on the collegiate level, there was an educator here in North Carolina who just quit his job at UNC because people, the administration was telling him that there were things that he couldn't teach, and they were I guess kind of spying on his class. With all of those things, do you think family engagement still gets the recognition that it deserves when it comes to how important it is for our students?
Yeah, I would say overall, no. I'd say like that's part of what drives me is I feel
Hmm.
like family engagement is an emerging field where, and the parallel was thinking about social emotional learning when I was in the classroom 20 years ago starting out. I was afraid that my principal would spy on me and say, why are your kids playing at the start of math class? And it took 2 years when, my kids at an underperforming, probably the lowest performing school in our district, had the highest scores in the district. It was only that made me comfortable and confident to keep doing those SEL practices. So I very much relate to that, like fear of engaging in what we know is best. But I would say in terms of family engagement, despite the research out of Chicago that shows it's one of the five key levers to move a school or district from good to great, I feel like it's low on the priority list. And I get that as a former principal that it's, easy to be more reactive to what's happening around the urgent things of the day versus proactive. Um, but I'd say overall, no. One of my greatest hopes is that in the next few years, similar to what we saw in terms of SEL becoming more of a priority for school districts around the country, that you and I are talking and celebrating 5 or 10 years, that the time and money and other things that it merits, it's finally given because it is so impactful and it doesn't require, a ton of extra time or a ton of extra money. It's really a mind shift, for a lot of educators, as well as some professional learning around how do we best spend our energy in ways that are going to deepen relationships and trust, and that mind shift of seeing families as experts, and for educators taking off that expert hat more to meet human to human, which I think a lot of our educators that I work closely with are seeing when they go do a home visit or they have a great parent teacher conference. It's because they're taking off that expert hat and engaging more on a relational level.
Hmm. Hmm. Now, when you say families are experts, unpack that for me a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, the heart of my work now, Dion, is these teams that are underrepresented family members, teachers, school leader, other school staff. And the heart of those gatherings are the educators building their capacity, learning from families. So, really acknowledging if we want to become better partners with families, they are the experts on essentially teaching us how to do that better. And that's as, granular as, hey, we don't read all your emails. I got the 18 emails last week from the school, the individual teacher my kids in, and the district. We're not reading them. Please text us instead, or a host of other things that families can tell us about how we build better trust or how we foster more effective communication. So I think it's really that shift, family involvement, essentially how can our school be of service to families and help meet their needs, to more of a how can we meet as mutual partners, to create this collaborative, strong sense of community where we all bring expertise.
Mm, that's good. Do you have any specific strategies or specific points that you normally address about getting fathers engaged in the class, right? Because of course, Dad's in the Class podcast. But I want to know where you stand on helping to get fathers engaged in the education process.
Yeah, I mean, it brings me joy in a number of our teams where we've got a sizable representation from fathers, and I feel like it's an area, and I know you bring a lot more expertise than I do around the father piece, so I'm curious to kind of turn the question back to you. But I think fathers need that personal outreach of, hey, we need your voice, we need your presence. here's what it does for students to see a father in the classroom, the way it, inspires. And I just read a piece last week in the Wall Street Journal about the impact of kindergartners having male teachers, and particularly male
Mm.
teachers that look like them. And I think, the same goes with fathers, of what it means for kids to connect more deeply to their learning, seeing their fathers in the school. So I mean, I think some practical strategies. One is, and this is an area where I uncovered in the last couple of years, some bias operating in my mind as a principal was, oh, it's going to be easier to reach the mom, or the
Mm-hmm.
mom might um, be more receptive to my call. So
Mm-hmm.
part of the shift is looking at that bias. I think many of us have, of, oh, the mom's going to be more receptive, or it's more the mom's role to see. Many fathers are very eager to get great news or be engaged around an important conversation about their kids' learning. So I think it's that mindset shift, and then it's including them in things like welcome phone calls in August or September. It's making sure a home visits scheduled around their availability, and it's also looking at ways to bring them in the classroom. There's a district down the way here in Colorado where they were working with fathers and mothers to train them on being classroom assistants, and essentially they put in 300 hours a year, and that was a pathway towards actual jobs at the school. So I think there's a lot of creative ways, and then events, intentional outreaches to fathers, so that they're there to celebrate, whether it's their kid's music concert, or at parent teacher conferences, a teacher saying explicitly they want, they're reaching out to both parents to make that connection.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that it's important to understand, just as human beings, we are more inclined to put ourselves in spaces where we are accepted and not just tolerated, right? And I think that it's important for educators and folks who are trying to get dads engaged to know the importance of that know, like, and trust factor, right? As a dad, I want to know who you are. I need to like you as my child's teacher, and I need to be able to trust that you have my child's best interest at heart, right? So I think that sometimes we have to go above and beyond to prove those things, and to be sure that we are accommodating dads and not just doing the one-offs, the donuts with dads or
Yeah.
things like that. We have to be sure that dads feel like they are appreciated and valued in that space, because so often, specifically when you're looking at men of color, a place of education, whether it be high school, middle school, elementary school, has not always been the most welcoming for us, right? I talk about just recently, I talk about how, and I don't know if it was on, I think I was talking to my therapist about it. This might be the first time I've shared this publicly. But when I was in high school, I was talking to my guidance counselor, and my guidance counselor at the time convinced me that I didn't need to take any foreign language. I didn't need to, attempt to take any advanced math, even though I'm kind of glad about that. But the diploma that I received was a vocational diploma, which means I never learned Spanish. I never learned French or any of those things. So that, as I've gotten older, kind of, it left a bad taste in my mouth, right? So a lot of us have similar experiences where we might feel like the education system hasn't been fair to us. So, we have to think about other people's life experiences when we are welcoming them into the schools, welcoming them into the classroom, because, everybody is different, and every dad has a different story and a different approach to being engaged in his child's education.
Yeah, I think that's such a key point, Dion. And I think about, like, particularly like you said, for men of color who've had either a negative experience in their own education growing up, or as dads, that it
Hmm.
requires the school to be proactive in prioritizing relationship building and trust building from the get-go. And I think a key part of that, and I've been delving into this and looking back at my notes from Atlanta and some other learnings, is just the key piece of listening. Like, I think fathers are often talked to and talked at in a lot
Mm-hmm.
of the school settings and school gatherings. And to your point, I think if teachers, school leaders are intentional about hearing their voices more, um, and creating that strong early relationship, it has a chance of shifting the dynamic. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's a growth area for most schools. Is we're still in the more let us inform you,
Mm-hmm.
than let us hear you.
For sure. How do you think that schools can tailor their family engagement strategies to include underrepresented populations? Right? How can what can they do to tailor their strategies to include folks who are historically not, uh, you know, receiving the same amount of representation as their counterparts?
Yeah. Well, I love that question because the essence and heart of these families and educator together teams that my book On the Same Team's about essentially addresses that question. Every month, these schools have a gathering where we've got maybe 10 to 25 underrepresented parents. And I'd say what's emerged in the 7 years and the hundreds of gatherings, I mean, some pieces are that initial proactive outreach, prioritizing relationships and trust, asking parents early on, first month of school, how do you prefer that we communicate with you? And then moving away from the norm of we're going to chat at conference time and at back to school night, but otherwise you may not hear from me, to building in ongoing communication. And I think, talking points, other text apps are great because, many of the families on our teams speak languages other than English at home. And the language piece is often a barrier and an excuse for the educators to not build the same kind of relationship so that families are continuing to be marginalized. So I think those are a few pieces. And then I think centering the voices of underrepresented families consistently to expose, what I say are like the biases, the barriers, and the blind spots of the educators and the school culture that's been developed that has not been shaped almost always by the voices, of underrepresented students and families. And our gatherings, the core part of the gathering is us asking questions that treat parents as experts. And they see Dion over time by like the third or fourth month. Wow, this is a shift in the normal dynamic. School staff are building rapport with me. They care about what I'm saying. They're giving their nighttime to build a better relationship with me, and they're following through. I mean, I think that's the key piece. Is in the early years of this team, I saw greater trust and community being built in these spaces. But when we did more around, okay, what are we shifting in terms of how all the educators at this school are doing to better listen to and connect with families? So I'd say that's a key piece. Is once families have told us, how can this be a more inclusive, welcoming, collaborative space, that we actually make those shifts. And
Mm.
parent teacher conferences and a couple other examples come to mind of where it was listening to the voice of underrepresented parents saying this was dissatisfying and I did not feel valued, and then saying, well, what would shift it? And 4 months later, the schools I'm thinking of made those pivots, and families came back saying, I feel heard, I feel honored, I feel like they see my knowledge about my child, and I didn't just have to sit and listen to them talking. So
Mm.
I think those are some key elements of making that shift, that it's a co-creation, not just a token, like, here, come a couple times a year and then we're going to judge you
Mm-hmm.
on whether you showed up or not.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, from an educator standpoint, what are some of the things that you're hearing um, that are challenges for educators who are trying to get families involved and get families engaged in their kids' education? What are some of the challenging things that they're seeing?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think the major one that comes to mind is time, right? Time and bandwidth
Mm-hmm.
of, um, hey, Ari, it's hard to do a home visit if my principal is not giving us time for that, or it's tricky to make time with everything I'm juggling. to make those positive calls or send those positive texts. So I'd say time right now is the biggest barrier with the 28 schools that I work, each month with. And so I'd say one of the insights, Dion, has been that school leaders need to carve out some time. And I've seen a number of principals say, hey, we don't need a 45, 60-minute staff meeting. The last 15 minutes, please go back to your classroom and call 3 to 5 families. And when that happens, it's uplifting and meaningful for everybody. And maybe 140 calls, let's say, are made during that 15-minute window across the staff. So a key learning for me in these last couple of years has been schools need to carve out the time, because some teachers who love this part of the work will do it naturally and on their own, but it's more effective to give everyone that time. And then you discover, man, that was so satisfying. I mean, as a principal, those 5 calls I'd make each Friday afternoon were often the most rewarding moments of my week. So when people get that taste of the power of high impact family engagement practices, then they're more naturally going to do it on their own. So I'd say time is a barrier. And then I would say, the other one is fear. That, part of why these team gatherings are so effective is they break down these boundaries, because I'd say we know 80%, I think the last stats, at 80% of the teaching force in the US is white women. I think there's a disconnect in fear around engaging with families from different racial, cultural, linguistic backgrounds. So part of it is, and I'm thinking about home visits, even something as simple in the trainings I do of giving teachers 1 to 2 minutes with a partner to rehearse that call, to get more comfortable. Because the research shows when they ask teachers, where do you feel least confident as a teacher? Number 1 was, I feel least confident to connect with families. So if you take that and then you add in a host of other differences, culturally, linguistically, racially, otherwise, that's another barrier, is to help bolster teachers' capacity and confidence in learning so that they can be more culturally responsive and just effective in their relationship building.
And you said something that made me think. What are some strategies that you could think of to help educators overcome language barriers? Because that could be, that I would assume that's a challenge, right? So what are some things that you are telling folks that they can do to help them overcome that language barriers? And you talked about cultural norms, and because in a lot of families, let's say dad is not involved in education. Dad is a disciplinarian, and that's all. That might be all he does. He's a provider. He's a disciplinarian, and he doesn't even know, because he's never seen a father be engaged in his child's education. So how do you help folks overcome language barriers? And I know this is a 2-part question: language barriers and those cultural barriers that might be present.
Yeah. Well, yeah, starting with the language barrier, some of the practical things I've seen that are most effective. I mean, one is ensuring that communication is going to every family in the language they prefer, and ideally through the channel they prefer. So it's asking in August, early September, what's your preferred language? What's your preferred style of communication? So maybe it's using Google Translate, for instance, so that the email or the text to families comes in the language they prefer. It's a couple seconds. I use Google Translate probably, every other day. Using the apps is highly effective. I mean, again, going back to something like Talking Points, it automatically translates into more than 150 languages. What it means to families to have it come in their language and then be able to respond in their language and have that then translated immediately back into English for the educator is huge. So, I mean, those are 2 pieces. A third key component is reminding families of their right, that they have a right to have an interpreter. Many families, that's not shared with them, and that then opens access for them to show up more authentically and comfortably and have their needs met. So I think those are some of the most pivotal pieces. And even, if there's a meaningful conversation, it might be 10, 15 minutes with the family, to have an interpreter present for that, as one way to really make sure that language is not creating inequities. Because I've seen teachers where they're much more likely to just reach out to families that, speak English. And then, to the second part of your question, I mean, I'd love to hear your perspective on this one. I think, one key piece is conveying the impact. I mean, for fathers or for families broadly, letting them know that family engagement, for instance, is twice is twice as likely to, I'm trying to capture essentially a child successfully completing their
Hmm.
education is impacted um, twice as
Based
more
on.
by family
Hmm.
engagement,
Yep.
than any other factor.
Yep.
And I think about my own daughter, the way that when we model things, like when we model interest in what they're learning, or we engage. I was just reading to my wife yesterday. It's like 7 tips on how to promote literacy in the home, and two of them were, have your child see you reading and have them see you writing.
Hmm.
So I think it's conveying to parents that piece of, the double benefit of them modeling their own learning at home, as well as the benefits of them connecting more with the school.
Yeah. I think, like you said, twice as likely for kids to succeed academically when parents are involved. I think it's about 39% more likely to receive all A's if dad is engaged. So for me, my approach has always been that every parent, I don't care who, what, where you are, every parent at their core wants their child to be better and do better than they did, right? And I think if you can convey that to a father, if you can convey that to a parent who is not as engaged as you would want them to be, I think that can go a mighty long way, because all parents want the best for our children, right? If we are in, if we're in the space where we are uh, taking our children to school, watching them grow, watching them go to school, and from kindergarten on up to elementary, to middle and high school, we want the best for our children, and sometimes we have to um, do a better job of conveying that to them. Like, okay, if you want your child to live a better life than you live, then I need your help, right? I need you to join in and make sure that they're doing their homework, make sure that they are completing their projects, make sure that they're coming to school, right? I think all of those things are important, but like you said, I think for some folks, you just have to kind of give them that push to let them know that they are important, they are valued. It's a team effort. It's not just, okay, you drop your kids off at school, they're here with me for 6, 7 hours, and then that's it. Like, no, this is we're a team, and we're in this thing together, doing the best we can to raise these kids.
Yeah, yeah, well said. Well, and just to add one piece to that, I mean, you're making me realize, like, one of the critical shifts from involvement to more engagement and partnership is not solely as educators looking at, for instance, our fathers coming into the school, and that's the gauge we're using, but instead recognizing how much they can do at home to support their child's learning. And to me, that would start with
Hmm.
first honoring what they're already doing, not supposing they're not that involved, but saying, like,
Hmm.
what are some things you do at home to support your kids learning currently?
Hmm.
Hear that, affirm that. And then, as all families are wanting to hear more from schools, share a couple ideas with me about what we can do that'll deepen that. And one of the schools I work with, I love that they created, for our final Families and Educator Together meeting last month, they gave every family member, here are 10 ways you can support your child's learning over the summer.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I think families want more of that. That there's some vulnerability, as we know as parents, to like ask that from teachers. So if teachers, as I was saying, can affirm and then bring forth some good ideas, and then
Hmm.
ask families, like, which one appeals to you. Not make it overwhelming, but say, like, here's 4 ideas. Which one aligns with your style and like what you'd enjoy? I think that those are
Yeah.
like often missing pieces.
Yeah, and I think meeting them where they are is important, right? Because we have to understand that you know math doesn't have to be done like sitting down at the table doing 5 times 5, or 4 plus 3, or whatever the case may be. You can do math in the bathtub. You can
Mhm.
do language arts in the grocery store. You can do all of these things in your everyday life. And sometimes you have to meet people where they are and let them know that a lot of the things that we talk about when we talk about family engagement, whether it be during the summertime, during the school year, can be done during your everyday life, right? And I think that's important to meet folks where they are and give them those tips of how they can engage and help their kids become better readers, help them become interested in science, but in sometimes a way that is non-conventional, right? And I think
Yeah.
as people who come in contact um, with parents or with um, parental figures, we have to give them the tools that fits in their tool belt, right? Because everybody's tool belt is a little bit different. Um, I want to talk about families of color. I'm sorry. I want to talk about some of the challenges that families of color might face when specifically it comes to biases. Is it biases or biases? Biases? I think that's
I think biases.
biases.
Yeah. Yeah. Biases.
Biases. Okay.
It sounds
I
strange,
feel a little
but
bit
yeah.
smarter when I say biases.
Yeah.
Some of the some of the challenges and that parents may face when it comes to like implicit biases that folks may have when it comes to uh, them being engaged in their kids' education. There's some data out there. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head about black dads in the home being X amount more likely to do homework with their kids. This study came out a couple of years ago, basically showing that black fathers are involved, they are engaged, contrary to what we see on television. So what do you think we can do to kind of combat those biases and those stereotypes that are out there when it comes to I'll say families of color, but really I'm talking about dads of color in their kids' education.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty critical that there's time to unpack that and help educators expose their own biases. And for instance, the home visit training I do, we added a third hour that was looking explicitly at implicit bias, how to be more culturally responsive, um, because I think that's often a missing piece. It's kind of skipped over. And I think when we look at the population of U.S. schools, um, for instance, I think it's 27% is children of immigrants. That's more than 20 million kids. And thinking about the, you know, the lack of learning that most educators have had around how to work across those cultural linguistic barriers. So I think a key piece is carving out the time for that training and learning. I mean, and then giving people the permission, pretty much saying, and there's a story, Dion, I often share of, our local district attorney asked a bunch of lawmakers, uh, lawyers that he works with, how many of you feel like bias impacts our justice system? Every hand in the room was raised. And then he asked, how many of you feel like you bring forth bias in your day to day work? No hands went up. So that piece of like really naming that we hold a series of biases and then giving people space to unpack them. I remember New York Times had some great short videos around bias, and their advice was like, uncover your bias, move towards it with curiosity, and then essentially tackle it and eradicate it. And so, um, I feel like so many of the gaps and barriers in schools are based on um, the distrust that's built up over time. And so I'm thinking about like some of the ways that schools I'm working with are tackling that is to ask questions about, where, to what degree, 1 to 10, do you feel a sense of belonging when you come to our school? How comfortable, how safe do you feel, as a parent of color coming into school in any capacity? And then when they're getting those, whether it's anonymous, as people are sitting in the room, or not, if they're getting a 3 out of 10 or 4 out of 10 on average, it's then delving deeper of like, why is that? And it might be as simple as, hey, my experience as a dad of color is that when I walk down the hallway, 9 out of 10 times, the teacher's not saying hello to me. And for educators to begin to gather that kind of data, and so I think a lot, the heart of it is doing deeper professional learning. But I would also just add as a final piece, engaging in the practices, not getting too caught up in reading. Even though I'm a huge fan of reading books and research and professional learning, it's the actual family engagement practices that reveal our biases and help us make shifts. So home visits. I remember meeting a colleague when I went to IEL's conference in Nevada 6-7 years ago, and he said, I inherited a grant on home visits. I didn't believe in them. And I came to see that they were the best way to build the cultural responsiveness of our educators. So it's through the doing, through the risk-taking, the vulnerability of stepping into a family's home that's of a different background. So I think that's a key piece, is educators delving in with vulnerability to actually building relationships with families of color, rather than just a more reserved, formal, distant approach that I think is all too often commonplace.
I'll tell you, man, I'm fearful that with the what is seemingly the death of DEI initiatives and equity initiatives across the country, I'm afraid that the importance of connecting with parents in a culturally responsive way is going to be lost, right? Because so many of our schools and so many of our school districts aren't going to receive training on cultural competency. They aren't going to receive training on looking at your own implicit biases. So I'm concerned that, again, folks who are underrepresented, Black and brown folks, will kind of fall under this wave of cutting, right? Of cutting out the programs that make it easier for us to kind of understand others' points of view. So that's really a concern for me. But hopefully we can just continue to put in the work, just continue to do the things that we have been doing. But I want to talk to you about some the what does a welcoming environment look like for you? And talk to me as a dad, right? Talk to me as a dad, not as someone who does the work. I want you to talk to me as a father. When you walk into a school, what is it that makes you feel welcome? You said saying hello. What is it that makes you feel welcome as a dad?
Yeah. Well, and before diving into that, I just want to touch on one piece you just spoke to, which I think is really important. Like, I share your fear, and I presented at a conference in April in a state I won't name, but where basically I was told I couldn't use the word equity in the slides. It
Hmm.
was that level of kind of control.
Hmm.
And so I share that fear. And I also saw yesterday, out of COVID funds disappearing, we're also looking at many American school systems with less money, which means less
Hmm.
training, for educators. So on the one hand, I that fear. I also, on the other hand, have hope in that every school system, to become great, has to look at their achievement and opportunity gaps. And one thing that I have uncovered through these families and educator together teams is when we listen to family voices, we uncover other gaps that contribute, of course, to these achievement and opportunity gaps. The ones I've kind of named are like a trust gap, a relationship gap, a communication gap, often a language gap that we've touched on, an information gap. We're giving inequitable information. So my hope is that schools, knowing that their role is to, whether they call it equity or not, is to serve all students and families, that propels schools to do the important work, even if they're, sadly avoiding, specific terms. So I just wanted to share that real briefly. But yeah, in terms of a welcoming space
Well,
as
let
a
me say this one
father,
second. All right,
yeah,
let me say this, because you made me think of something. So not only are COVID funds are gone, we know that, but depending on the results of this upcoming election, Title One funds could be impacted, right?
Mhm.
So there could be a cut in Title One funds going into 2025, because we know that there is legislation that could possibly be passed depending on who is elected as president. And that legislation could cut funding for schools that have 90% of students who receive free and reduced lunches. So um, we're at a crossroads, right? Our educational system is at a crossroads where the schools that need the money the most are at risk of losing more money when they already are underfunded. So I just wanted to throw that out there, just if anybody's listening and wondering uh, about how this election is going to, one of the ways that this election is going to impact the educational system. But I'm sorry, Ari.
Yeah, yeah,
Floor is
no,
yours.
that's important, and it makes me think too that family liaisons are some of the most important people I think in our systems, and it's a team that I work
Mm-hmm.
closely with in our school district. And my hope is that they would not be cut if Title One funding is cut, and it prompts us as a country to think about if we do have less money for schools, how do we make sure that we're elevating some of these impactful practices that don't require more money? And carving out 15 minutes for everybody to go make a positive call doesn't cost anybody money. So to me, that's like a key piece in
Right.
terms of that welcoming school piece. I think it starts in the front office. As a principal, I remember kind of inheriting a front office team where it was not welcoming. And so I think some concrete things is staff learning parents' names, pausing what they're doing and greeting you by name and saying, "Here, come sit beside me. You want help with that free and reduced lunch form? I'll do it with you." Not the, "Oh, yeah, that's on our website. I got to get back to what I'm doing" kind of attitude. So I think enough can't be said about the importance of that initial experience in the front office. Also, of course, that school leaders have an open door. And and as a dad, I know principal teachers visible outside the building with warmth,
Mm-hmm.
with inquisitiveness. I think another piece all dads can relate to is when an educator shares something they know about your son or daughter, how much of an impact that makes of wow, my kid isn't just another name or number in this school. You actually know something unique about them. I think that piece is huge. And then what I shared earlier, Dion, in terms of like taking the expert hat off and being more met with teachers that listen, that ask good questions, and that have curiosity and are willing to also acknowledge mistakes, and acknowledge their own ignorance or lack of knowledge, and just really open to learning about the family. So, I mean, like, I know getting a welcome letter that would enhance my openness to a teacher. A call saying, "Hey, we hope to see you, Mr. Gerzon-Kessler, we hope to see you at back to school night." That consistent warmth and ideally invites into the classroom. I mean, you were making me think earlier. One of the best teachers I worked with around family engagement, she would often host, you know, students reading poetry, performing plays, and inviting parents, other caregivers into the room. And also, I'd say as a dad, honoring that many of us have untraditional schedules and are very devoted to being, like you said earlier, providers. So host a lot of events at times that make me feel like you considered me when you created this event.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You know what? You know what makes me feel good, Ari? When I go into my son is 6. He's going into first grade. When I go into his school and not his teacher, but when other people around the school, they know me as Macio's dad.
Mm,
Like I'm cool if you don't know my name because I'm not good with names myself. Like I'll forget a person's name in a second. But for you to know like my son's name and to connect me with him in that way, and then if you have something like positive to say about him, oh man, I'm sold. Like I'm
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
there was one of my son's teachers. It wasn't his media center teacher. I think it was his media center teacher. When we would come through the carpool lane, she would, put him in his booster seat in the back and kind of buckle him in. And some days, man, she would just rave about that boy and just talk about how great of a student he is and how much of a joy. It was so good that one day my wife picked him up, and the teacher was like, "Is he's coming back next year, right? Is he coming back next year?" And my wife was like, "Yeah, he's coming back." And the teacher was just all smiles, and you would have thought that my son was the stellar student and just like the star of the class. Like those type of things make me feel good and make me feel kind of warm and fuzzy about, because that lets me know that you care about the kids, right? And you care
Yeah.
about how they're feeling and how they're doing, and you're connecting with them on a really, really personal level. And I love that. I love it.
Yeah, I love that example. And it's just reminding me briefly, Dion, like there's a piece I often share of like one of the best tips around this work is treat every interaction as an opportunity to deepen connection and trust. Because
Mm-hmm.
to me, your story is reminding me like the warmth, the smile, mention your son's name. A lot of that doesn't require some fancy learning or complex strategies
Mm-mm.
or a bunch of money. It's
Nope.
it's presence, which to me, I study Zen each weekend with my wife, and like the heart of that, of course, is how do we become more present to reality as it is. And I think, and I was guilty of this as a kind of hurried principal and teacher at times. If we slow ourselves down for those brief moments of connection and acknowledgement, like you're saying, that's often the greatest piece. And I remember a father telling me when I left as a principal, my first principalship, he said, "I don't know if you know me, but I just appreciate the way I've seen you interact with my daughter and the way that you say hello, to my wife every time she does pickup, and know my daughter's name. That has meant so much to us, and we feel
Mm-hmm.
more a part of this community." And that's always stuck with me. It's like I did recognize the dad, but I didn't know what it had meant to him. So that reminder for us as educators that people are always watching us and how
Mm-hmm.
we're treating and engaging, with their family and other families.
Yeah. And I want to invite anybody who is watching right now on the YouTube, on the LinkedIn page, to drop a comment, drop a question in the chat. We're talking about family engagement. We're talking about how dads can make school better. So, Ari, let's talk about your book, man. You've got a book that is out and is selling out everywhere. It is flying off the shelves. The book is On the Same Team, bringing educators and underrepresented families together. What are the key takeaways for educators in your book?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. I would say, like, a synthesis would be the first chapter really explores the barriers that we kind of touched on in some ways to stronger engagement, and then it delves into all the benefits. And I think that inspires each reader to prioritize this family engagement work more fully. The heart of the book, though, is looking at how do you create a structure like these families and educators together team, or layer it into your existing work so that there is more genuine collaboration between families and educators. I mean, I think it's one of the key pathways to creating stronger school communities. We say that the tagline for the book is like a family-centered approach to more equitable schools. So
Mm.
it gives a ton of stories and examples of how a strong team is built, because like we were talking about earlier, many schools, there's a real existing distance between underrepresented families and educators. So a lot of intentionality about how do we design a space. I mean, that's been my greatest joy, is learning over time how do we create a space that's going to be comfortable and welcoming and safe and enjoyable for every single parent and educator in the room. And then it goes beyond into, like, how do you launch a team? How do you create engaging gatherings? And pulling a lot on the research around like what best practices can you implement realistically and meaningfully that can benefit every single stakeholder in the school community. And there's also a chapter on like how do you become effective, culturally responsive team leader of this work. So I think it really, my hope is that it inspires people to take this work deeper, because I've seen that when schools invest in building a structure, the deeper things we talked about happen. When there isn't a team or a structure and that space is not created, the change is much more glacial in its speed. So I'd say like the heart of the book is a framework and then pathway to building deeper, more meaningful collaboration where all families feel valued and educators also feel like they want to stay at the school longer because they've developed all these wonderful connections and relationships with families.
That's good. As we look forward for you, what are some of your goals in terms of family engagement in the work that you're doing? What's the big goal? What's the big uh, picture look like for you?
Yeah, no, I love that question. And I mean, I think more than anything, it would be to see our schools mirroring, if it's one of the five key levers to move from good to great school, let's put in the top five of our priority list. And that would mean weaving in systems, including the professional learning time, for folks to talk about and delve into some of the themes we've touched on, this hour. And then that every school in 5-10 years, we'd see that positive calls, proactive, welcome letters, welcome phone calls, home visits, texting back and forth so that communication and relationship building is ongoing, that all those things are not left up to chance, but are an ongoing part of how most, if not all of our schools begin to do business. So that families consistently say, I feel deeply a part of this school community. I feel like my child and our family is valued and seen for the strengths that we bring, and that educators would feel more kind of buoyed by all the rewards of deeper partnership. So yeah, my ultimate hope is that we can all elevate our field so that the attention it's given and the benefits it has are more visible, because you and I were talking earlier this hour, there's so many academic and other outcomes that we just pass over often in many schools of, oh yeah, we can just keep doing the same status quo
Mm-hmm.
approach to our events. And I guess ultimately a shift more from events to relationships,
Mm.
stronger relationships and trust being woven into the culture of each school, not just left up to chance.
Yeah, I think again, no like and trust is super important. I want to read this comment from Dr. Easley. Great chat, my brothers. The importance of how educators and staff members interact with parents is powerful. Dion, you shared the rich story of how a teacher would praise your son during pickup, which is great. But you also said that she would put your son into his car seat to buckle him in and ensure his safety. That is going beyond the call of duty. Awesome. Absolutely, man. And just a huge shout out to all of the educators who go above and beyond, because we know that this work isn't easy. We know that there are barriers and challenges and just so many things that educators face every single day. I, for one, as a parent, as someone who is in this space, appreciate you, right? We appreciate the work that you're doing, because you are the ones who are shaping the future. You are shaping the minds of our young people, and it is one of the most important jobs in the world. So, lastly, Ari, before we get out of here, I want to ask you, as a father, how are you balancing your work with family engagement with your role as a dad? Like, how are you finding that balance, and what are you doing to be sure that you are being equally yoked, so to speak? I don't even know if that's the right term for this. Or I just be saying stuff, man. I just be
I
saying
like
stuff.
it.
Uh, I don't even know. Equally yoked probably doesn't even go. But how are you making sure that you are finding balance in your work as a family engagement expert and a dad?
Yeah. Well, it's an ongoing work in progress. I would say, for me, my journey to fatherhood was a long one with some adversity,
Mm,
and I wanted to be a father, from a pretty early age. And so the long, windy path, I now really savor it and don't take it for granted for a moment. And as a former foster dad as well, like with the joys and the challenges and the loss I experienced in that process. It's really prioritizing it, just like we're talking about as a teacher with family engagement, um, and trying to make sure that I'm disciplined around, as my wife and I always talk about, like keep the computer, keep work in the other room. So
hmm
I'm really trying to be intentional and really present when it's dad time, that I'm fully there, and noticing a distraction as it comes up, but then putting it aside. I'm grateful for summers, Dion. I mean, I've made it an intentional piece of um, trying to make fatherhood in the summers my number one priority, because sometimes
mm,
supporting a few dozen schools and gatherings mostly at night, like I miss bedtime with my daughter, and
for
that's
sure.
often painful. So I would say it's reminding myself, I mean, of that adage. I remember reading a guy who was in his 90s saying, like when you look back, probably one of your regrets is going to be you didn't spend enough time with your kids. So
Mm,
using that wisdom to try to guide me when I'm drawn to what's more urgent or more work centered, to come back to like what's going to provide the most nourishment to her and to me, and also support my wife. So I won't say it's easy, but yeah, I think it's that intentionality and really trying to savor the moments, knowing that everybody with older kids always like, oh, it goes so fast. So trying to remember, okay, how can I really look for? And we just, another author sent me this great idea of a journal, one line a day of capturing what did she say, what did she do,
mhm.
that'll not only be sweet for her down the road, but as a way for me each day to think about what happened today that was special in our father-daughter bond.
Yeah, yeah. I'll tell you, man, as someone who has a 20-year-old and a 6-year-old, not only does it go fast, right? As it goes, you will become slower, sir. Don't let anyone tell you any different. As fast as it goes, you, sir, become slower. But you also will learn to enjoy those moments, and you will also learn to find, find peace in that part of parenting that you're in, because parenting, man, is it's so funny that there's different levels of parenting. There's different types of parenting. I had to parent my daughter when she turned 18 differently than I had to parent her when she was 17. Now that she is 20, we got her a car for her birthday, so now my parenting is a lot different because she has her own car and she can kind of come and go as she pleases. But still being there to guide and still being there to nurture and letting her know that I'm here. It's one of the most beautiful things in the world. And to have a 6-year-old who is, still developing his mind and his, his approach to life is just totally different than hers was. You know what I mean? Like for my 6-year-old, he's like literally we were at the dinner table, he's doing division and multiplication and like
Wow.
telling me to give him harder problems. And he wants to learn, like not learn, but he knows decimal, like all at 6. Like he's not even in first grade yet. So it's just different, and every part of the journey is special. Every part of the journey is special. But again, it goes fast, but you will start to go slow.
Yeah, yeah.
And
No, I can
slow is not bad.
feel that already. Yeah. Well, and there's a wonderful book called The Tao of Parenting, and it's the name of it.
Mhm.
And I've been reading it lately, and it's contained a lot of those gems like you were just speaking to, of ways to allow wisdom to guide us, and Yeah, and being an older dad, I'm trying to see the upsides of that, and it's definitely a different experience than when I was a foster
Hmm.
dad, 20 years ago. So
Yeah. Here's an anecdote, and I'll say this before we close out. As an older dad, we went to, and you probably won't have the problem in Colorado, but if we go to the park in the summertime, it has to be before 11 a.m. Now we're in the South. It has to be before 11 a.m. because once that sun starts to move over and those temperatures starts to rock, Dad just can't take it. So today we went to the park. We got out there at about 10, stayed till about 10:45, got home because we were hot and Dad just didn't have the energy anymore. If I was 25, 35, maybe I could stay out there a little bit. At 44, all right, nah, we go first thing in the morning. We get it all out, and we come before the sun really, really starts to beat you down. So, just a quick anecdote,
uh,
man. You may not have that problem in Colorado, but
no, I do,
in the South.
and I thought it was a me thing, not a dad thing. So I really appreciate and resonate with you. And I just went to Florida for a wedding, and I was struggling nonstop. So yeah, that makes me feel less alone in that, like,
Yeah,
I can't
man.
be
Yeah.
outside with her after 10, 11 o'clock.
No, no, no. That's just foolish. That's just foolish. Don't let anybody tell you anything different. All right, that would just be foolish. You're a glutton for punishment at that point. In the summertime, I mean,
Yeah,
we get 100 degrees, 100. Why would anyone want to be outside? Like, no, we get it out
exactly.
early in the morning. Then we, come home and we chill. So, all right, thank you so much. Tell people where they can get your book, sir.
Yeah, Solution Tree website, solutiontree.com, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, pretty easy to find, and I promise it'll be meaningful and an inspiring read to get you ready for the new school year.
For sure. I'm going to pick up a copy today. And social media, how can they follow you? How can they find you?
Yeah, easiest is LinkedIn, also Facebook. Those are the two best channels to connect. So please do reach out. I'm supporting a number of schools in different states and feel deeply passionate about making it fit for what most serves you or your school community. So please don't hesitate to reach out.
For sure.
And thank
For
you,
sure.
Dion. This has been really dynamic and lively. I'm so glad we got to go in depth.
Thank you, sir. I guess I will see you in October. We'll be in Savannah. Yeah, Savannah in October. I'll see you then. For everyone else who is listening, who is watching, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Check the podcast out. Make sure you listen to some of our older episodes and tell all your friends about it because this is the number one podcast for families and family engagement. And we'll see you on the next episode. Peace.